Good evening to all the students that's meeting us online this evening. A hearty welcome. It's Professor Maritz again, and I'll be taking you through the second part of your literature review and conducting a review. It might be a critical review. There's also other types of reviews that we mentioned last night. But we'll be going in a bit more depth tonight with some recapping on what we discussed yesterday. But tonight we'll focus more on the actual practical application and also bring in Bloom's taxonomy again, where it can help you. But I'm also going to show you some tools that you might find useful. You know, with the emergence of AI, there is a wealth of tools that you can use to assist you, especially with your literature review. So I'm going to share a bit about that as well tonight. So as always, have a pen and paper together somewhere close or somewhere to jot down ideas. Because as always, there's some exercises that you can participate in, check your knowledge, check your understanding, and that at the end we'll have your question and answer session again so that you can actively participate. So if you have any questions, please jot it down, and we will then have a more interactive session at the end. Thank you for last night's interactive sessions. You've really been very good at interacting at the end. Also from some very useful questions. Then there was one request in terms of can I demonstrate or show you how to develop a framework, conceptual frameworks. And the good news is that tomorrow night's session is exclusively focusing on just that. So we'll be going through the nuts and bolts tomorrow evening, how to develop a conceptual framework. So you have a whole 2 hours that we'll dedicate to that. All right, then, so we are off with tonight's session, and please travel along and keep on jotting your ideas, or if there's an exercise, you can also jot the answers maybe, or your awarenesses in that and post it in the question and answer session. We can have a discussion around that as well. So for now, I'm closing my the video, and it will just be my voice, but I'll connect again with you in the second half of the session when we have our Q&As. All right, so yesterday we spoke about the technical aspects and getting started with a literature review. So just to have a short recap and have you engage in tonight's session in the beginning and not in the end, I'm going to give you an example of an abstract of a study or a paper that was written based on a comprehensive review, or what they call a comprehensive review. So you can already see that different people call things differently. By default, all reviews should be comprehensive, and by default, all reviews should be critical. But we did speak about critical reviews yesterday and what they entail, and this author has called it a comprehensive review. But I'd like you to read the abstract on 2 levels. Firstly, it's an example of how an abstract or a title would look, first of all, for a literature review. I've given you the journal. If any of you can Google quickly or try the methods that I told you about to find out if current opinion in psychology is a good journal that you've established somehow, that it's peer reviewed. If it's maybe a quintile, falls within the quintile 1, 2, 3, or 4, or any other measures that we spoke about last night to identify if this is a worthy journal. So we're going to start off by just quickly reading through this. And what I'd like you to identify while you're reading is, if you can, maybe identify, they are calling it a comprehensive review. But we've spoken about different reviews last night, and see maybe if you couldn't call it something else. And then also evaluating the standing of the content of this abstract, and it also gives you a potential example of what an abstract might look like for a review article. So it starts off by saying the study provides a comprehensive literature review on the impact of social media use on the mental health of adolescents. Drawing on numerous peer-reviewed articles and surveys, this paper underlines the correlation between extensive social media use and increased level of anxiety and depression among teenagers. Most studies indicate that high screen time, particularly before bedtime, leads to poor quality of sleep, contributing to deteriorating mental health conditions. However, the review also acknowledges the positive aspects of social media, such as creating a sense of community and fostering peer support. This dual impact calls for future research to establish a balanced understanding of social media's effect on the mental well-being of the younger generation. So, other than trying to find out if this is a worthy journal, I'd also like you to give your opinion in terms of the types of reviews that we looked at last night. And if you could maybe give your opinion in terms of what would you call this type of review, and then also evaluating the abstract, and see if it identifies the gaps in the literature. Remember last night we said it's very important that your literature reviews is a project, a comprehensive project on its own. It has a research question, it has a purpose, it has a method, and it then has findings and a conclusion. So after reading that, see if you can answer if this journal is in good standing, if you could evaluate that. What would you call this type of review? And do you think that this abstract is, does good to communicate the aim of the article and the findings, and does it identify gaps, and does it tell you at the end maybe what the gap is and how they think it might contribute? So there's a few things for you to check and put your thoughts around, and maybe jot down, and we maybe jot down in the question and answers as well, and we can maybe have a short discussion. Then also back to a comment from last night, where someone asked, how do we know that it's a peer-reviewed journal? I've just opened up the journal site for higher education research and development. It's the main page on their site where they tell you about the aims and the scope of their journal. And you will see there in the very first line, it tells you that this journal is an international peer-reviewed journal. So there's your answer already in the first sentence of the aims and scope. So usually you would find it on the journal page pretty much in the beginning already, because that's a huge criterion. And so sometimes you'll find it under the aims and scope of the journal as well. So pretty easy to establish or to find out if the journal that you're busy with is a peer-reviewed journal. Then just something else on the journal site, just a click on another setting So under the journal information, they also tell you where this journal is indexed in. And you can see the different platforms where it is where it's indexed. And you can also from that index kind of see whether this journal, where it's placed at, whether it is, with publishing in. And remember, for all your articles that you will publish under the affiliation of UNISA, that all the articles need to be accredited, and that is, there is by the Department of Higher Education, because the university generates subsidies for that, and they will only subsidize journals that is accredited in that list, but there are literally thousands. But in that list, you will see there is a list for these different databases. I'm usually quite excited when I see it is hosted in Scopus. That is, I think also, Scopus is one of the platforms that also generates very strong peer-reviewed journals usually. The Web of Science Index is a very, very worthy database. So above all the others, there's two that stands out for me, and these two are definitely part of the indexes in the accredited journal list from the DOE. So you can find all that information to help you identify the standing of a journal, and you'll usually find it on the journal site. So happy hunting and happy identifying at least 5 to 8 journals in your subject area that are worthy to be used and that you have critically appraised for their usefulness. All right, so then we're going to continue with some new content for this evening. Remember last night we spoke about scoping reviews and also meta reviews, integrative reviews, and systematic reviews. So you might wonder, so if you wanted to do a scoping review, how would I know what to report on? And that's the same for all the other types of reviews. Now, the Prisma is a checklist that contains 20 essential reporting items and 2 optional items that you can include when completing a scoping review. It's not just for scoping reviews, okay? You can use it for any type of a review, the reporting items, and then you'll be quite sure how that you cover all of these. But I'm going to also give you an example. So the scoping reviews, they also just say it serves as a synthesis of evidence and assesses the scope of literature on a topic. And among other objective scoping reviews help determine whether a systematic review of the literature is warranted. But you can use these guidelines in terms of writing or reporting on your review for any of the reviews. And I'm going to show you there is a where you can find the Prisma criteria, the history, and if there are any new or new versions that come out. You will see it doesn't, they started the Prisma in 2018, so it's not that long ago, but it helps that the reporting in terms of the literature review is streamlined. I promised that I was going to show you some tools that you can use. So when we spoke last night and we say that there's a specific methodology that we follow, we started off our discussion on how to source our literature. And we said, you would seek peer review articles, good journals, but say, for instance, you have now identified a number of journals. So you maybe the librarian might have assisted you, or you might have used one of the databases, and you've now collected, say, 10 or 20 or 30 articles. But you are maybe a bit worried that this isn't enough, or you're not quite sure if you've covered everything, and then how to go about organizing it and working with it. So before we go over to developing a Prisma, the report, one of the tools that I use is Ryan. And you'll see there in the top left-hand corner how you spell Ryan, and also where to find the Ryan software. There is a free version, and there's also a paid version. The free version gives you quite a lot of aspects that you can do, but the free version doesn't generate a Prisma for you. The paid version does. So I'm on the paid version just because I do quite a lot of this. UNISA at one stage said that they were getting the license for Ryan. There's one other type as well, but they've got silent about it. But it's such a useful tool. So I've just given you what I'd like to give you is just an overview of what Ryan can do for you. So on the landing page, you will see I created a active review. So this was the project. You know by now that my niche area is looking for support for postgraduate students, also for supervisors. So that's what I named the project. So there's the project title, the type of review. So you can add whatever review you're doing, the domain, and then just a description of the program. Then what is very important when you are doing a scoping review, some of the journals are very strict on the doing of the scoping review, in that they say there must be at least 5 members that is doing the scoping review, and you'll understand why. So please don't panic now. You can add members such as, for instance, your supervisor, or a member could be the librarian. And, there's ways to get around it. But for this project, we actually had 5 members. So there's just some of the members, and I can review, I can give them different roles, I can see if they're active, I can see how many reviews they've done. So that's just on the very first page. And then you also have a dashboard such as this. So you could now see that from our articles. So we contacted the librarian sent us a list of articles, and we then uploaded all those articles to Ryan. So we imported 131 references, and there were some duplicates in them, and this program helped us to detect the duplicates and delete them. So at the end, we started off with 89 articles that we were working on. You will see down at the bottom, it also gives you a screenshot in terms of how many articles the team then accepted or didn't accept, or was included in the review. So you can see at a glance where you are in terms of the project. So what happened in real time? with this project, after we uploaded all the articles, you can see we uploaded in different file formats. There were a few uploads as we got new articles together through other ways. So you would see that each article has its own domain. The actual article you can call up in the PDF. Because we were 5, the first line of establishing whether the articles will be included in the scoping review is that we were each assigned a number of articles to do a quick review, and then we would make a tentative decision. So you can see in the first one, Gisela did the initial review, and so it would show as yellow if we haven't made a decision in or out. Once we went through all the potential in and out, we got together as a group and we went through those articles. So when it comes up on the screen, all 5 would have reviewed each article. If it came that there wasn't a clear yes, in or out, then the program would tell you that there are potential articles that doesn't have a decision yet, and they were not resolved until we got to a consensus of which articles to include. So you can see there were 34 articles that there wasn't consensus on, and then we went through all of them and resolved them with a clear yes or no, whether they in or out. So very nice, Ryan, all your articles are here. You can call them up, you can look at that. On the first, it gives you the abstract, you can go to the actual article, and you can then get information. You will see just on the next page, it will tell you what the methodologies were. You can also ask it to call up quite a number of other aspects. So in the end, you can then ask Ryan to produce a Prisma flowchart for you, and the Prisma flowchart looks something like this. So this is the 2020 version. You can see it's already adapted. So there's 3 stages. There's the identification stage, there's the scanning stage, and there's the inclusion stage. So I pretty much went over each of these stages for you. So the first stage, we identified our literature. We then started to screen, we removed the duplicates, we marked which were eligible or not. We also gave reasons for those that we didn't include. So this will later be populated. Then identification of studies via other methods. Did we maybe get articles from Litmaps, or did we stumble across an article, or were there any other ways that we got some of the studies? Then it would tell us how many records we screened, how many we excluded, how were they retrieved, not retrieved, sought, and reports not retrieved. It would give you the assessed criteria. What was our inclusion-exclusion criteria? So for this study, for instance, we said we would only look at articles published in English. We were only looking for articles published from 2020 to 2023. That was the year we did the review. The reason for that is that our argument was that during and post-COVID, support strategies for postgraduate students changed quite significantly. So we were only looking for post-COVID support. Then what did we include, what did we exclude, and then it gives us a total at the end, how many studies were included. So that's more or less what the output would, or the outcome would be for your methodology, then of your scoping review, your systematic review. So you can use these guides for any of the reviews, and you will have a very detailed methodology as to how you went about it, and anyone can duplicate it for themselves and see if they come to the same conclusion. It's also there's an audit trail, so if anyone wanted to audit your findings or check it out or just make sure, there would be an audit trail. So that's more or less what the Prisma outcome would be, and the Ryan software will then generate such a report for you as you go through the processes. So it really becomes quite it's a lovely way to do your literature review or your scoping or other reviews. I found it so much fun. I just want to keep on doing it. And then another tool that I just wanted to show you. So please visit the Ryan platform. Please visit the Prisma site. There's a lot of interesting information, also useful things for your literature review. Now, another application that I use a lot is Lit Maps, and I use Lit Maps to source articles for me. So Litmap also has a free version and paid version, but I do pretty well with a free version. So what would happen with Litmaps? You would have a seed paper. Now, your seed paper might be, one of the papers that you source from a high impact journal, maybe one of the main authors in your field, or seminal work, or a respected author, or a huge new finding, but an article that you want to base your search for literature from. You would then import that article to Litmaps, and what Litmaps will then do, it will source for you other articles in that sphere, or in that phenomena that you are looking for. So you can see on the side, I've got the articles. I know how many times they were cited, so I know they were pretty well cited. Their indexes, I have access to the actual article. But so Litmaps then generates more articles in the same vein. But what is very nice with Litmaps is that it draws a map for you, an interactive map. So this is just a screenshot of mine. But if I move over the map in real time, you will see that these also change. So I can immediately see, remember I said my inclusion criteria was from 2020 to 23. So sometimes Litmap forgot about that, and that's why we've got the outside layer of articles. But you will also then see of the articles that were relevant, that's inside the circle, how many of them were related. And so I can now with ease actually say that I now already know who were the key authors prior to this map. And then when I move interactively within the map, Jackman comes up as the most cited author that speaks about postgraduate student support. So a lot of information. Is also nice to put a visual in your or a map in your literature review. So I hope you're as excited, but there's also many other applications. So please, many of them have as a free version. Play around with those. It can really do a lot for you. That when we did basic reviews and we still sifted by hand or read all of it ourselves, it was pretty tedious. And these types of resources help you to speed up the the time that it takes you. It also, I think, does more thorough searches than what we could previously do, and it can collate, it can show you information, and there's less chance of errors in counting and so forth. All right, so that was just kind of a bit of fun where you can get started. But please play around, ask around. There's many. I usually look on LinkedIn. There's a few people that I follow that regularly gives updates on what they're using, what they find interesting, and what they will use it for in their research. So play along with that. This was just a teaser before I go to a lot of content again. So moving on for this evening, then just a few steps in terms of what we discussed last night. So remember, we said that there is steps. There's a design, so your type of review, then you conduct the review, you analyze your data. So your articles are your data. And then you structure and write the review. There's also a nice link for you to there's many articles available on how to do these reviews. This is just one of them. So let's go along in terms of what we need to do in each stage. And this is just another way of presenting some of the information that we dealt with last night. So if you weren't in last night's session, here's a quick recap for you. So when we design our literature review, we're thinking about it. Think about who's the potential audience of this review. If your initial audience might be the committees that look at your proposal, then the audience moves. The next audience might be your examiner. And the next audience after that might be reviewers in a journal. And because we're writing for different audiences, we might write, that might just implicate what type of review we do, but also in terms of the reporting. Then also remember we said your review has to have a specific purpose and a research question. We need to think about the appropriate method. We need to formulate search terms, inclusion, exclusion criteria, and we need to identify database and search engines. And in last night, I gave you a screenshot of the library and some of the databases that you can have access to. So that's your design phase. Then what I've discussed just now is the actual conducting the review once you've done the design. So does the plan in stage 1 produce the results required, or does it need to be amended? People, anything to do with research is never cut in stone. With the scoping review that I just showed you, initially we wanted to look at mental health. But we soon discovered that was maybe too wide. And with the search terms, that wasn't really giving us the results that we wanted. So we needed to change some of the words and the scope of the scoping review. Very important, what I've also showed you now is to document the decisions, the key terms that you use, because you're going to need to report on them, the process you followed, and the results for an audit trail. Now that's where the Prisma comes in, and also if you used other things such as Litmaps or Orion, that will all provide an audit trail for you. And then very important, how was quality ensured? So, for instance, we had 5 people doing the review. So, that was kind of a peer member checking process to ensure that there wasn't bias with the inclusion and exclusion of the articles. So remember, we also said last night, garbage in, garbage out. So the same goes for biases. If there's only one person doing the review, then there is scope for biases. And that's why, I also ask that please clarify this with your supervisor. But I like my students that are using, for instance, Ryan. I'm always invited as a reviewer as well. So the student does do most of the work, but I can have oversight in what they are doing. So those are different measures where we can include or do a quality check as well, and give an audit trail of our decisions. And that's very, very important, is that if anyone asks you anything about the process of your literature review, that you can give them an answer, because each decision that you make was recorded and justified through the process. And then our next step would be is that once we have the articles that we've decided in our review, we start analyzing the content. So you need to decide what information you need. So I usually encourage my students to, you can use an Excel spreadsheet. There are some of these applications that it will actually automatically, if you import the articles or ask it to search articles, will give you a complete report in terms of who's the authors, where they're from, where's the article, where was the study done, what methodologies that they use, and what were the findings. And it will generate a table for you. But you can also produce such a table for yourself using Excel or any other way. But it's nice if a program does it for you. So you would start with your analysis, and you need to decide which information do you want. Then analyzing within a work and then between work. So it's analyzing a article and then analyzing multiple articles, where you will now start to compare and contrast, identify themes, and look for deviant cases, maybe start identifying relationships between the findings. And very often, a mind map is also very useful for you to start mapping your ideas. So last week, someone asked, how do we present our findings? And there's different ways of doing that, but a mind map could help you, sort out ideas, placing them, drawing lines, relationships, and figuring that out. There's also programs that can do it for you and generate mind maps for you, or word clouds, and you can identify maybe which are the main areas that comes out in your analysis. So one important thing with your analysis that links to your writing, and why I like mind maps, is often I find that students start, when they've got a hunch, they start writing. And then they start adding information or moving information, and they cut and they paste. Eventually, by the time the examiner starts reading it, it is all over the place. You can see that their thoughts weren't organized. And people, I promise you, it really takes me 2 seconds to read 1 or 2 pages of a student's work, and I can tell you whether their mind is organized or not, because it shows on paper. So it's easier with a mind map to move things around and then start writing it up, than try and move things around when you've already written it up. It becomes very messy. So with any part of your work, maybe try and have a visual of it and move things before you start writing them. So that links, we'll talk a bit more on writing just now as well. And so when there's different ways that you can analyze your your articles. Remember, I said that your article now becomes your data. So in qualitative research, our data is words. So we would interview someone, we would transcribe the data, and our data ends up in words. Now, the same with a literature review, you've got a lot of words. So you could follow the same principles that we follow when we analyze qualitative data, because we are working with words. So you can read to get a sense of the whole. Then with a second read, you can jot down the main ideas maybe, or of the findings, or whatever it is that you're looking for. You can then, between articles, get a sense of categories that might merge, and then you can group the categories into themes. So this is a very similar process that we follow in qualitative research when we analyze or work with words. So you can use the same type of an approach to analyzing and identifying themes for your literature review. But it's also up to you. It would depend on what information you want and what is the question that you want to answer. Then we said read and appraise critically. I think this should have maybe been the first, but we've talked about reading and appraising critically and our critical thinking. So when you have an article, ask yourself, how is it relevant? Is it relevant to your study? Is it current? Is it up to date? Does it consider the latest research on the topic? Bias. What's the purpose of the article, and why are you including that? And is there any bias from your side? So how bias might play out in a literature review. If you have a tentative hypothesis, or you have an idea around what maybe you have experience in the topic, and you decide, well, I've had this experience, so I know what it is. I know what the phenomena is. So when you start looking for literature, you might start or select articles that confirm what you think about the topic, and you're not including other viewpoints or other points of departure. So that's personal bias, and there can be other bias as well as selection bias, bias in your analysis. So bias can creep in many ways, starting with the selection of your articles already. And then accuracy: does the data support the conclusion? And I think with the abstract that we did right in the beginning, you can also then also use this criteria to evaluate the worth of the article. I just said there at the bottom, or ask Atlas TI to do a summary for you. Last night I showed you some of the features on Atlas TI. So there's many programs, especially when you're doing a systematic review, where you actually include the appraisal of the article in your write-up as well. And many of these programs can do that for you, or write it up amongst a number of articles. So we spoke about mind maps just now. So it's simply a tool for the brain to capture the thinking that goes on inside of your head. This was just a mind map of one of my students at the business school in Stellenbosch, devised after she did her literature review. So it's not a framework, it's simply how she used the mind map to identify the different themes that she was picking up. And yeah, you can clearly see that she had themes, but also then sub-themes or categories, and how she kind of, plotted it out for herself before she started reading or writing up. So, if you then decide, okay, technology should maybe come last. It's easy to move it on the mind map, but if you start writing it and then start moving it, then you might lose the train of thought as you're going along. So if you are a very visual person, it's nice to do it that way. There's other ways as well, whatever you think works for you to help organize your thoughts. Because messy thoughts leads to messy writing. There's simply no other way to get around it. So find out what works for you. I want to give you an example of what it looks like when we now write up the methods section of our literature review. And you can now evaluate, keeping the Prisma in mind, also what we talked about, and see whether this section is detailed enough. So they tell you that the first two authors independently conducted the literature searches. They tell you what they used via Google Scholar. So that's the database or the search engine that they used. So if they say the first two authors, we are left to assume that there were more. But if I had to appraise these two authors independently conducting a search, so there's some checks and balances in for bias. Two people did that. Only using Google Scholar, we can maybe wonder about, but in any event, that's the search engines that they used. Then they tell you to find reviews that appeared from 2019 to 2021. So they have inclusion criteria and combining 4 sets of search terms that correspond with their inclusion criteria. So there are the terms, the search terms that they use: review, meta-analysis, or synthesis. And then they had a second one: social media, social networking, Facebook or Instagram. Then a third one: well-being, mental health, and psychopathology. The fourth one: adolescents, youth, or children. And then they tell you included studies had to be published, reviews that focused on those 3 aspects. What was social media was the one, mental health and adolescents were the other. So you can now identify for yourself whether you think this reporting is adequate. Formulate your ideas, maybe just jot it down, because a bit later I'm going to show you another example. So think about this one. Do a critical appraisal of the methods. Do you think it's solid, or do you think they needed to report a few other things for you to really be quite sure about their methods? Because remember, if the methods fail, then then already you're wondering about the outcome or the findings. So it's very important that we get this step right, and that it's rigorous. All right, so we've spoken about how you would design your search. We've spoken about how you would go about finding articles, how you would go about analyzing them, and now we get to the final step after we've done all this, and that's to write up your findings. And I'll also give a few minutes to talking to you about common problems and challenges that we might experience in the process. So when we are writing up the findings of our literature review, or the results of our literature review, what we want to do, we want to tell the story of our search and of our findings. So you want to make it a pleasant read for whoever needs to read through 20 or 25 or 30 pages of a literature review. I must say, this is the most hated aspect of my job ever. I hate reading literature reviews because they usually are written up so boring. So when I examine a thesis or a dissertation, I would leave this nearly to the end because it just breaks my soul. But when it's written up in a engaging way and it tells a story and you can actually take your reader with you, then it becomes a very different thing. So please make it easy on the reader. You must remember that whoever examines your dissertation or your thesis or your project might not be a subject area specialist in a specific area. So you can't assume that the reader knows what you're talking about. You need to be quite explicit. But please attempt to write it in a way that that's logical, that makes sense. That yeah. So very often a literature review is a very dense read. You know, it's a lot about who says what and why and how and when and then and then and then. Um, uh, I often say I need to drink a glass of wine before I read a literature review, but it doesn't have to be that way. So it's something that you need to practice. Academic writing, as I always say, is no one's first language. It's a skill that you need to learn. Some of us are very good storytellers. There's also scope for maybe being creative. It depends on your reader. So your supervisor should be able to tell you, you know, who might be reading it and if they're open to new ideas or not. For a master's study, I wouldn't play around with a general way of doing it, but on a PhD study, maybe you want to do something interesting. But please make it easy on the reader. I think one of the most important things is to start off by giving the reader a roadmap. I often use the metaphor of taking a child and you're going to walk through the woods with them. So you'll take their hand, and before you enter the woods, you would usually tell the child what they can expect. So we're walking in this wood now, and we're walking along a winding path. Can you see the path ahead? On the right, you'll see some trees, and on the left, there's a stream. But we'll soon walk over a bridge. And when we're on the bridge, you might see this or that. So you want to, in the same way, take your reader along and give them an idea of, in the beginning of the chapter, of the route you might be following, what they can expect in the chapter, and then present it logically and in a way that makes it easy for the reader of your literature review. All right, so it takes time, it takes practice to write for an easy read. You must also remember that you might have read, saw in the scoping review, we started off with 83 articles. Sometimes it can be more than that. And you can't discuss each 80 of the 83 in detail. You've got 20 or 25 or 30 pages for that. So your ability to write succinctly is very important. It's a skill that you need to develop, and the only way you develop writing skills or academic writing skills is by practice. It's one of those things that none of us are necessarily born with or get it right the first time. It's something that you practice doing. The only way you can practice is by writing, getting feedback, rewriting, readjusting, reviewing. And I often say you scrub and you polish and you do it multiple times to get to the final product. So bear with it. It is a process. You'll also see in the picture there, you can maybe just Google this, telling a research story, writing a literature review. It's a lovely piece of writing, and it can give you some pointers in terms of how to tell a research story or a story of your literature then. So writing the review, when writing, the motivation and the need for the review must be clearly communicated. Depending on your approach, the final review article can be structured in different ways, and we discussed it last week, and it will require different types of information and also different levels of detail. So Prisma for systematic review, then there's also a similar list of criteria. They call it RAMSIS, that you can use for integrated reviews. It gives you similar processes. The reporting criteria might vary here and there, but the Prisma is generally, good for multiple types of review, but you can also look at RAMSIS. So when we write our literature review, any writing or any chapter has an introduction, then a body, and then a conclusion. So even when you were in primary school and you needed to write an essay, your essays would have an introduction, a main body, and a conclusion. The same with your literature review. So you would typically have an introduction that would cover what is the objective of the research, what was the research question. Then you could also now in your introduction already have your methods, what work did you consult, how did you contextualize elements, what was included, excluded. So all of that. So in your introduction, you can also mention the methods that you use. So in other chapters, you might, your methods would be somewhere in the middle. But in your literature review write-up, your methods can be in the introduction already. Then the main body, and that's where you report your findings of your literature review. There's some, it would all depend on what type of a review you did and what was the focus of the review in terms of how you want to write it up. So whether you critiqued specific works or theories, remember we mentioned last night which type of review does critiques, and we call it a critical review. If it's a quantitative study, you might have started with your dependent and independent variables, or start from your themes, or whatever way you have now envisaged how you will write up your results. Then very, very important is your conclusion. I think that's probably the most important aspect of your literature review is your conclusion. Because what went first or just before your conclusion is so in the introduction you had your argument. In the main body, you have your evidence, and in your conclusion, you then either confirm your argument, or you may disconfirm it, or what you have to do is find the gaps for future research. And then very importantly, where are you then putting your research, having done all of the above? So from all of this, what are the gaps, and where does your research then find its place? And that is the main aim of a literature review, is to see what is out there, what is missing, and where you are placing your research then in the current body of knowledge. Okay, so the main structure, I think, is pretty straightforward. The challenge is usually in the main body and to decide how you're going to present it. Then also some tips on writing. Please remember to paraphrase, use your own words to restate the information. with a very important caveat, and that is that you do not lose the original meaning of what another author stated. So please be very careful when you paraphrase and then later refine. I once had the very unfortunate incident where I was still a very, very young author and academic, and I wrote an article for a relatively prestigious journal in South Africa. Sorry, I just want to drink something. And in this article, I mentioned a certain author. And then when I got the reviewers' comments back, one of the reviewers was one of the authors that I had mentioned in the article. And he very politely, or maybe less politely, wrote back to me and said, where you quoted me is not what I said. And I think I've kept that in mind ever since, is that when you quote someone, or when you paraphrase their words, please keep in mind the context in which it was said, or the context of the study. Please make sure that it's an accurate representation of what the author said or meant when you paraphrase. Then your summary focuses less on the individual message and more on the main message of the source. And when you combine these different voices and sources, that is when your more strategic message comes in. Reporting verbs. I often find when we write, when we still novices, that we run out of verbs. And you might early in your writing get feedback of don't say all the time A said, B said, C said. You need to vary your verbs. So there's a few reporting verbs that you might consider, but there's many others. So you can say A suggests, B argues, C claims, D points out, E thinks, some report, identify, indicate, show, propose, describe, discuss, give, or develop. So those are just some verbs, reporting verbs, to just vary what the authors say or propose or suggest or discuss, so that you can just vary them. But you can also go Google reporting verbs. There's many, many, many more, but these should take you a long way by itself. Okay, remember in the beginning, I said that I'll give you an example. Now, this is another example of a abstract of a review article, and I'll give you a few a minute or two just to read through that. And then you can compare it with the first example that I showed you, and then maybe reconsider and evaluating the very first one. So with this example, the author says that higher education aims for students to produce knowledge from the critical reflection of scientific text. So some background just leading into the abstract. Therefore, developing a deep mental representation of written information is necessary. So there's a tentative kind of a hypothesis or start of an argument. And then they go on to say the objective of this research was to determine through a systematic review and a meta-analysis the proportion of university students who have an optimal performance at each level of reading comprehension. So they now tell us they did a systematic review and a meta-analysis. Now, remember when we spoke about meta-analysis last night, we said they are very often, the systematic reviews is very often useful, and the meta reviews for quantitative information Now, you can clearly see by the reporting that there's a lot of figures. So they didn't necessarily go out to report on or look for words. They were looking for numbers, for instance. But they do tell us what type of review they did. They also give you the inclusion criteria of studies between 2010 and 2021. They also give us the databases that they used. They tell us that 2 reviewers performed the data extraction independently. They use a random effects model of proportion for the meta-analysis, so also their methodology for the meta-analysis, and heterogeneity was assessed with 12. So now they start telling you how they did the analysis, the regression, the moderation, the variables, and also 2 ways were used to study publication bias. Then they report on the number of articles that they eventually used, what was their sample, and then they tell us comparing reading comprehension levels, a significant higher proportion of university students have an optimal level of literal compared to the rest of the reading comprehension levels. And then they tell us the results have to be interpreted with caution, but are a guide for future research. So quite a lot of information that is presented in this abstract. They other than just giving us what their design was, they gave us their methodologies. They also gave us the findings and their conclusions at the end. So I'm sure you will agree with me. This example of the abstract is much more rigorous than the first one that we saw. So we also said last night that systematic and meta reviews and integrative reviews are more comprehensive. They take longer, and I'm sure you can now see why. And that their methodology is quite rigorous in its reporting. Right. We'll be done with all the theory in a minute or two. Some generalizations. So in general, what we want to describe transparently the process of designing the review, the method for collecting the literature, how it was identified, analyzed, and synthesized, and then organized coherently concerning the approach and the research question. So those are the very basics of what would be needed in terms of your reporting. Then I just quickly wanted to spend a minute or two to talk about Bloom's taxonomy again. If you were in the sessions last week that I facilitated, we used Bloom's taxonomy to help us develop our objectives. Now, you can also use Bloom's taxonomy and higher order thinking skills and arguments when you are doing your critical writing for your literature review. And it might look like something like that. So we have Bloom's taxonomy on the right, and the levels, remember, it goes from very basic, and then as the prism goes up to the very tip, it is where we find the most our critical thinking and comprehension going to the top. So if we apply it to writing, remember it goes from the basic to more specialized or more critical thinking. So if when we spoke about narratives last night, a personal narrative, when you recall a story or event, is at the very basic of writing, for instance. That would be kind of writing in primary school or in school, where they say, please write an essay of your hometown, or some kind of experience. But when we do a literature review, we're starting to do expository writing. When you are trying to explain ideas or interpret abstract concepts, or explain concepts or values by analyzing its merit. So you will see now that your literature review kind of sits from the second to the fifth level in terms of the taxonomy of critical thinking. And we then get to persuasive writing, where you examine facts or a position, take a position, and evaluate other writers' position or stylistic choices. But then at the very top, we get scholarly and creative writing, where you start synthesizing information and creating original arguments, hypotheses, or creative works. So similar to when we spoke about Bloom's taxonomy to assist us with our objectives, going from the basic to the more critical and creative. Similarly, we can think about Bloom's taxonomy when we write. So just some ideas for sticking with Bloom. So remember, we said knowledge is at the very bottom. And we can apply this to our writing, where the writer presents information from a source or text so that the reader can understand and comprehend it. And this is usually definitions or summaries or tables or diagrams. We use it for basic knowledge and explaining basic concepts. And now when we go to comprehension, this is where you summarize, describe, paraphrase, or interpret to help the reader understand. So typically it's where you would translate or interpret or extrapolate the meaning. So yeah, there is some inferences made, or there's some interpretations where you need to explain the relevance of a source or text, interpret the significance, or provide an interpretation of a descriptive piece of writing. So that's one level up. Then when we get to application, this is where we show the reader how the knowledge has been used over time. For instance, when you describe a concept or explain why the concept is essential to your study, for example, or where it has been used in different studies. That's on the level of application. Then when we get to our analysis, you can now already see we are close to the top of our critical thinking, and this is where you start to analyze, and you also then use your reporting verb. So Jonas shows 3 components that are crucial to. Dlamini identifies 5 additional details, whereas Dory only mentions 2. So you can already see we're starting to break concepts, data, or issues into parts. We explain the parts and their relationship between them. We look across text, compare and contrast, group and classify. And then at the very, very top, we start synthesizing, or the second from the top. So yeah, you would say, for instance, although the literature shows that the concept has 3 essential characteristics, these characteristics are shaped by economic. So now you take your findings and you put them back together again with insight. So in our analysis, we took apart, and in our synthesis, we need to put it back together as a whole. And often I find that this part is very difficult for students. It's quite easy to take things apart, but it's a lot more difficult to put them back together in a coherent new whole. And I find the same with students that are pretty good at analyzing data, but then synthesizing the data becomes a bit of a stretch. And then lastly, we get to the highest level, and that's the level of evaluation, where you make judgments. Now that I've done this study, what is missing, logical reasoning limitations, those are then at the level of evaluations. So you can see that even our writing moves up in levels, and just by using the concepts or the thoughts around Bloom's taxonomy, we also similarly in our writing and reporting move through these levels. So we've already said quite a mouthful. Just some assessing things that you can use to assess the quality of your review or a review. What's the depth? What's the rigor? What's the is it replicable, useful, practical, and is there theoretical contribution? And that's what we are looking for in a PhD. Remember, PhD, you'll have a new contribution to the body of knowledge. Then finally, if you would want to publish your literature review, very, very important is that you need to be upfront when you publish your literature review, is that you need to sell this review and you need to hook the reviewer pretty quickly. And you do that by telling the reviewer or the editor, first of all, whoever's doing the desk edit review, is what is new, noteworthy, or different. And I mentioned the other night the so what. So the so what of this literature review. So what have you discovered that's new, that matters, or that's different? So, for example, creating a timeline for analyzing and predicting where the field is heading, or comparison of different related terms or constructs that can serve as a base for theory development, or identify actual knowledge gap in previous research. You could also identify gaps in methodologies, for instance. So that gap analysis is very often, also a very important aspect. So you, for any article that you are writing for a journal, start off with what is the contribution pretty early on, the so what of that. And if you can't convince the editor of the journal of the so what, your chances of this article being sent out for review is very, very slim. They'll reject it. I think I've mentioned to you, I've had an article rejected within 2 hours of submitting it to a journal. There's other things at play when it comes through that quick, but that can happen to even a seasoned author. But don't give up. I think that's the bottom line. So we've talked about how to find a home for your articles or for your publishing. So you can go back to how you would find on the journal the site. It will tell you what is the aims and the scope of this journal. What do they include? What do they not want to have? So please read the aims and the scope very carefully and make sure that your work fits within the aims and scope of that journal. Otherwise, they will reject it, even in the desktop stage. All right, so they definitely don't humor or feel sorry because you're a first-time author. If it doesn't fit into the aims and the scope of the journal, they'll reject it. So don't set yourself up for failure. Please read the journal website. Please look at the author guidelines and follow them. Each journal has their own way in which they want articles presented. Please follow that rigorously and do what the journal asks you to do. So very important aspect to make sure that you identify the right journal, and that can be quite a lengthy process on its own. But if you started in the way that I suggested, to identify 5 or 10 top journals that speaks to what you are studying or looking into, then you already know which journals you might want to play with or in. And that makes the rest of the journey so much easier than to stress about finding a journal afterwards. So even for your writing up your scoping or literature review, uh, I've had students that have published that before they've completed their studies, and we actually presented it in the format of how it was published, for instance. So finding your journal pretty quickly is very important. Um, just an example of how do you identify a journal? Again, the Higher Education Research and Development. On their website, they will say that it informs and challenges researchers, teachers, administrators, policymakers, and other concerned with the past, present, and future of higher education. So they quite clearly say that they are interested in studies within higher education. Then they tell you that this journal publishes scholarly articles that make a significant or original contribution to the field of higher education. So they're clearly telling you they want the so what. Then they tell you what types of articles they publish. They publish empirical, theoretical, philosophical, historical articles that address higher education in any of its dimensions. They also welcome research that interrogates, challenges, and reflects on a range of theoretical and methodological frameworks. Again, they're telling you, so what? All articles must propose a fresh critical insight into the area being addressed and be appropriately framed for an international audience. Now, that's very, very important, is that when you are writing for international journal, you need to know your audience and that they are, in this case, an international audience. So you can write studies that were conducted in South Africa or any other part of the world, but you can't assume that the reader now knows the context. So you need to be very explicit for the international audience. So, they also say they foster conversations around particular issues. So I just a few months ago submitted an article to this journal, and they rejected it because of this the specific thing. They foster conversations around specific issues. So what they had said that I didn't do is I did not link with other papers that were published in this journal. So I met all the other criteria, but I didn't link my study with other studies previously submitted and for this journal and was accepted. And so on that technical aspect, it was rejected even before it went out for review. So read what they want and ask very carefully, because you spend a lot of time. And I've previously published in this journal, and this time it was on that technical matter that they didn't even send it out for review. So please learn from others' mistakes as well. So they say, please review former issues and, where possible, engage with previous published articles as part of preparing for your manuscript. Now, the thing that I did, is because I previously published in this journal, I didn't rigorously read this section again. Otherwise, I would have remembered that was one of the things that they're quite big on. Not all journals do that, but this specific one is obviously quite strict about that. So don't set yourself up for failure. Please read what the journals want. Then the very last of our slides is not on a very positive note, but we'll do something about that. It's just a short conversation around common problems. that I've picked up in literature reviews, seeing that I enjoy them so much. So very often what trips us up is the over-reliance on low-quality sources. Remember, right in the beginning, we said garbage in, garbage out. A lack of landmark or seminal literature, a lack of current literature, also a lack of transparency where you wonder about the methods and how they got to doing what they did. Selection bias is often quite prevalent, and and if there's bias early on already, for instance, in the selection phase, then it's problematic for the rest of the review. Generally, we also find that, especially students, when they're starting off, give descriptions instead of integration and synthesis. Remember, I said earlier, it's easy to take things apart, more difficult to put them back together again and synthesize. So on an honors level, your literature review can be a description, and it will go through as that. But a master's level, and most definitely on a PhD level, you need to start using critical thinking and in your reporting and your analysis and your synthesis. Irrelevant or unfocused content. I think that's often quite a large mistake, is that the students don't have a strong focus from the beginning, and then they go walkabout, like the Aborigines. They start walking through literature and they walk in circles and they just put everything in that they came across. And then the content loses focus, and then the read of the literature becomes quite a challenge. A poor chapter structure and layout, and that usually goes along with messy thoughts or thoughts that's not organized, that land up unorganized on the page as well. But I've given you some hints as to how you can overcome that. Plagiarism, quite often a big problem, and we often see it with the Turnitin reports of these chapters as well, is that paraphrasing, plagiarism, or poor referencing is quite a problem. So someone asked, I think last night, do you need to reference every sentence? You need to reference every statement, and statements around what other people said or found. Then once you've provided evidence, you can come to a conclusion, which is your own. But please be very careful when you write up, that you don't plagiarize and that you do a good quality paraphrasing. Poor academic writing, I think we've spoken about that. That's writing that puts the reader to sleep or wants them to really gorge at their arms and rip some organs out. But this is something that you can overcome. There's a lot of books on academic writing. There's a lot of training on academic writing. There's many workshops and writing retreats that UNISA offers. Please attend those. And the only way you learn to write is to write. And the only way you learn to write well is to write even more. And please, you will always receive feedback on what you produce. And very often the feedback is not so much related to the content, but you might find a lot of feedback, especially in the beginning of your studies, in terms of academic writing. So please don't lose hope. It is a skill that you can develop. There is a lot of opportunities out there to develop these skills. So please make use of them very, very early on. And then something what I call the scope creep, and that is that the scope keeps on getting wider and wider instead of narrower and narrower. And that's something similar lack of focus of the study. So what I do when I write literature review, for instance, I will have a post-it or some note on my computer or on the wall in front of me that says what the scope is of what I'm writing about. And when I lift my head, I see that. So I'm constantly reminded of what the focus of my writing is, and then I can check myself when I go walkabout. Now, if you're anything like me, I love words. So scope creep for me is very easy to do because I go after the juicy reading. It's inevitable when I start searching for literature that I stumble across something that's really juicy, and then I go along a tangent that is maybe not helpful to my current writing. And although it's very enjoyable, it wastes quite a lot of my time. So be careful of that. It's easy to lose track. So that was quite a mouthful, I think you will agree. So as I mentioned in the beginning of the session, tomorrow evening, what we'll be doing is that we will be looking at developing conceptual frameworks and more around of, so what do you do once you have a literature review? What are opportunities in the beginning or at the end of studies around that topic? So also think about what you might want to get out of those sessions, and then you can also look forward to tomorrow night's session, and we can then start having a conversation. Basically, it goes along with what we've discussed in a logical sequence from last week to where we are this week. So for now, I'm going to have a look at your questions and your comments. Thank you for those that posted those. Anonymous, thank you for the presentation. Could you mention or give an example of apps that can help in analyzing your literature review? You had mentioned some apps that can analyze an article, provide helpful reports. Well, definitely the one that I mentioned last night in terms of analysis is Atlas TI. That's one of the resources that that can assist you with organizing your articles, but also to analyze them. And that has an AI feature that can do something similar. I'll just look, other than the ones that I mentioned last night, I just need to backtrack a bit and go and look at the others. But what I'll do for you tomorrow evening, I'll try and set up a more comprehensive list for you, because there's so many. But I'll try and produce a more comprehensive list for you of potential others. But the ones that I've mentioned tonight are the most common ones and the ones that I use. But there is one that I didn't put up tonight that can maybe answer that question for you. And I'll get that ready for you for tomorrow evening. My brain is a bit of a tired by now, and I can't recall it exactly, but I'll get it ready for you tomorrow evening. Sorry, I'm at the end here. Where do we find our info about writing retreat? Are they venue-based or virtual? They could be both. There's also retreats that's, for instance, done at other universities. I know Stellenbosch has a summer and a winter school, and they have quite a number of writing retreats. You can also ask in your departments. Very often the departments have writing retreats, often for staff, but sometimes for students as well. But there are outside providers that also provide writing retreats, so you can Google as well and look for those. but there are times that they are presented at UNISA either virtually or on site as well. So just have a look out for that. One of the first questions, what's a scoping review? I'm not going to go back on that. We discussed it in detail last night. So when you have the slides, you can go back to the slides. We did deal with the scoping review at length last night. What's the name of the first application? Sure, I'm not quite sure which one you're referring to now. The applications that I mentioned was Ryan. I mentioned Litmaps. Last night I mentioned Atlas TI version 23. Is Litmap similar to Connected Papers? Yes, it is something similar. Name of first application. Okay, someone answered that. It's the Ryan. Dear Prof, thank you for the presentation. From which part abstract results in discussion or conclusion of someone's paper, article, journal, thesis we can take for the literature review? An interesting question. I think I did answer it by default by saying it depends on what you're looking for. So if you are and that would be guided by your research question. So you might be looking for findings of studies, or you might be looking for say, for instance, you want to look at what support strategies are mentioned in the articles that you selected. And then you'll be looking for in the findings or in the paper what support strategies they mention. So it would depend on what is your research question. And that would then depend on what you're looking for in the article. So you're guided by the focus of your literature review. I hope that answers it for you. In the literature review, is it necessary to introduce the authors and what they do before citing them? I don't know if you're referring to the authors of, if you are now publishing an article, then no, unless you publish the article, and then obviously the author in information and affiliations would then be on the article. If you are talking about co-investigators in a review, then you possibly wouldn't go into that much detail, but you can, for instance, then say why were certain members selected. So for our scoping review, because we were looking at postgraduate students and we were looking at mental health and support, we had people on the team that had expertise in mental health. We had people on the team that were educational, had a background in education. We had someone that was had a background, was publishing in postgraduate studies. So you can then justify who you had on the team that did the reviews. But then I would just report it as, there were 5 people on the team with backgrounds in A, B, and C. And that's about as far as what I would go in terms of reporting. If you are saying authors and what they do before citing them, if you're talking about the authors of the articles, it depends whether you're looking for that information, but generally you wouldn't report on that. What you might report on is what's the context of the findings. So they had maybe findings that you want to use, but it was, for instance, used or the study was done in a very specific context. And that sometimes I would add that type of information to explain in what context the findings were either done, this research was done, or the findings needs to be read within a specific context. So hope that answers that. Scoping reviews are conducted to map the literature available on a topic in a systematic way. Okay, someone answered what is scoping reviews. Thank you so much. What's the ideal length of a literature review? It depends on the scope of your study. So literature review on honors level might be something like 10 or 15 pages. For a master's degree, it might creep up to about 20 pages. For a PhD, 25. But it might also be that you split the chapters, that in one chapter you have your literature review, in one chapter you have your conceptual theoretical frameworks. So PhD, the bigger the scope of your study, usually the bigger the scope of your literature review as well. But a general length around 5,000 words, about 20 to 25 pages. It depends again. What was your question? What was the scope of your question? How broad was it? And what was the aim of the review? If you've covered what you need to cover, then you've covered what you covered. But in general, I would say, remember when and I think I'm doing the training a bit later on in developing your chapters. What we aim for in a dissertation or a thesis, that we have chapters of more or less equal length. So what we don't want chapter 1 that's 10 pages, the literature review 60 pages, then the methodology 20, and then the findings 40, and then the conclusion 45. So what we aim for is chapters of more or less the same weight. And therefore the ballpark figure that I'm giving you of 25 is on a PhD level more or less what the length would be of any other chapter as well. And that's often why people will also then decide to break chapters in two, is that one chapter becomes too heavy, and that's often your literature review. Okay, in a paragraph you write, must it focus only on one aspect of Bloom's taxonomy? No, not necessarily. Remember, we use Bloom's taxonomy to demonstrate the levels of our thinking, and so each paragraph can go through different levels of Bloom's taxonomy. You might have one paragraph that analyzes, or 2 or 3 paragraphs or pages that has to deal with the analysis, and then another few pages that deals with the synthesis and the interpretation, and a shorter paragraph to write about your conclusion. So it can be in different paragraphs, in different sections, different levels of Bloom's taxonomy. It simply gives you an indication of how higher order thinking and writing develops through writing up and doing your literature review. At what stage of the research do we do the literature review? Do we do it when writing the proposal and include it? Yes, most definitely. Anything to do with the literature review takes quite a lot of time and effort, and you definitely don't need to lose it. So most definitely you can use the literature review that you used in your proposal, especially if it is quite a strong and a lengthy one. Please use it again in your chapter. Some information might be in chapter 1, or all of the information in chapter 2, but you can most definitely use it from your proposal into a chapter. You can then maybe find that you need to refine it or that you add onto it, but you can most definitely use it. So the whole idea, you put a lot of effort in writing a proposal. You don't throw away any of that information. Say something about thematic, theoretical, and historical literature basic defense the procedure of using a review. Okay, I need to read this again. Say something about the thematical, theoretical, or historical literature basic difference and the procedure of using a review. Okay. You can also refer back to last night's slides. The thematical review is actually a thematical reporting. So we don't usually call it a thematic review, but we would report at times the outcome of a thematic analysis of the literature or of the review. A theoretical review by default, all literature reviews are theoretical, and then a historical review would simply mean that you are specifically looking at historical sources. So that has more to do with your sources. So please, if you want to know more about the different types of literature reviews, we discussed them in length last night, and you'll also have access to the slides where we compare and contrast them. We also say what is the different types of reviews, where we use them, what you need to consider when you're using them, and so you can find most of that in last night's slides. Okay, I think I've answered the one in terms of apps that can help you analyze. Yeah, I think I've attended to that. How many pages for master students, and can we use AI for paraphrasing? Now we're getting to a bit of a contentious issue. Okay, I think I've answered the literature review for a master's study, anything from about 20 pages, 25, usually not more than that, could maybe be on the lower end of the 20s. Can we use AI for paraphrasing? Yeah, I don't mind my students using it, but you need to be the content specialist. So when you use AI for paraphrasing, what happens and how they are detecting it at the moment is that if you are saying that you used AI for paraphrasing, then they would often then ask you, so where's your original writing? If you said, for instance, you used AI for copy editing or for paraphrasing. So you needed to have done the original work. And then you might consider using AI to improve that. But you need to be very, very careful, and you need to critically evaluate what the AI version gives you, and that it doesn't lose meaning, and that it is still true to the meaning that you intended it to be. So be very careful around that. Even if you give AI, your original work, it can sometimes take on a different slant or put it together in a way that you didn't mean for it to be. So I had an example today. I used ChatGPT, the paid version, extensively. But I had an example today of where it changed around the meaning of the content and distorted what the author said to such an extent that it was horrible. So please, you are still responsible for the end product. And maybe also just check out with your supervisor. I use it more for copy editing than for paraphrasing, but be sure that you've got your original version to fall back on if there are questions. All right, so it's about what I'm telling you is do it ethically. Prof, for your presentation, what level of percent is acceptable for plagiarism? Okay. When you use Turnitin, Turnitin isn't a plagiarism checker. Turnitin looks at your similarity index, and that's different from looking for plagiarism. So what Turnitin does, and please go to the Turnitin training, there's a lot of it throughout the year. What Turnitin does, it identifies written aspects in your report that you submit, and then compares it to what has been written before. And if it's then written in the exact same words, it will highlight, and it won't say that you plagiarized. It would say it's similar to, and it will give a source. And that's why it's so important to paraphrase, because if you use direct quotes, you can imagine that your similarity index skyrockets because it's immediately going to pick it up. So you are asking, some says it's 20, 16, others less than 5. Even during UNISA's workshop, there's a big difference between 20, 16 and less than 5. I do agree with you. It is a tricky affair. The percentages can also differ in terms of what the settings are, for instance. Sorry about that. So that can affect it. I have a PhD student whose Turnitin similarity is for the thesis is, I think it was 16%. This morning. But it's very important to go through the report and see what was highlighted. So in a complete thesis, you can understand that the front page will be exactly the same as thousands of other students. So it picks it up as similar. It might also pick up headings, and that's similar. But even though it picks it up, it's not plagiarized. That's the structure of a thesis. So I always go back and read the reports, and then if you maybe are submitting with something on the higher limits, I would always just add a section or two that comments on it somewhere at the end of your thesis or dissertation, or I write a note to the examiners to say that as a supervisor, I have gone through the report, or sometimes I invite someone from the Turnitin team to go through the report with me, and then to justify whether it is indeed similar or what is the explanation for the percentage. So there isn't a hard and fast. If you can get it under 5, it's amazing. Somehow my students at Stellenbosch gets it right to have everything less than 5, but I think it has to do with maybe at times settings. But the UNISA system often, detects the higher similarity. So it would. Why are we saying also paraphrasing? And as soon as there's a loophole, the students use the loophole. I've had some very interesting ways that students try and navigate around that. But generally, if you use more than 5 words after each other from a specific author, it's going to flag it. So don't use the same words as the authors did. Even as little as 5 words, it will pick it up. So please do a decent job of paraphrasing, okay? And yes, there is, for me, I don't look at the score so much. I look at the report that it delivers, and then I go through the report. All right, hope that answers a bit. Doctorate, when do we publish the articles? Can one publish in the first year? Most certainly you can. So you publish with your supervisor? Yes, indeed you do. Can you publish with any other experienced author? Not if it's from your PhD and they haven't been involved in the supervision. or has so publishing from your thesis or your dissertation, there is usually an agreement between you and the supervisor. Remember, a master's study, one article. It will definitely be with your supervisor, but you will always be the first author. Then with a PhD, you need to publish 2 articles. They'll definitely be with your supervisor as the second author. After that, you can publish on your own, or that's my agreement with my students. Sometimes they want to continue publishing with me. It's sometimes just easier. But some of my students have published after the first 2. They carry on to publish from their thesis as a sole author. Just remember that even if you publish on your own and it's from your thesis as is, that your affiliation still remains UNISA. All right, you can't, if you now get a job after you've done your PhD and you go to another university and you publish from your PhD, you can't now do it under their affiliation. So the affiliation will remain the UNISA affiliation there, because it's about intellectual property and the likes. UNISA now says, I think, that the intellectual property is the students, but remember, it was the resources, the time, and the funding came from the UNISA affiliation. But so the PhD, you can most definitely publish in the first year. You can publish your literature review in the first year already. You can potentially publish your methodology. If it's a very unique methodology, you could publish that quite early on. And I would really recommend that you do that and not wait until the end. Please remember that you will not graduate without having those articles in a master's submitted or a PhD published. So rather start earlier than later. And start writing with the article in mind. So make sure that whatever you're writing is rigorous. There's been a rigorous methodology, a rigorous analysis, write-up, and that it's at a level of an article. So if you polish your writing, then things along the line becomes a lot easier. All right. Do supervisors take into consideration the percentages on the reference list when generating a Turnitin report? Most definitely. There is, and it goes along with the principle of not overusing sources. So yes, we do definitely, and I think in that there is a specific percentage that is not more than 1% of a specific source. So the principle around this is that we don't want to overuse of sources. Now, what often happens is sometimes with PhD students that did a master's degree and now they're carrying on with their PhD in the same topic, they would reference their master's study quite extensively. And then it picks it up as an overuse of a resource if you refer extensively to previous work. But it's around that principle to not overuse sources. So most definitely, I do check the percentages in the reference list as they come up in the reports. And that's the reason why I do it. Okay. Is it a must to publish in your master's? Yes. If you are registered with UNISA after 2020, it is a must. So for a master's study, you need to have, I'm speaking under correction, but for a master's study, you need to have submitted an article and have proof of a submission. Where PhD, you must have published it. But if you registered after 2020, then yes, it is a must. All right. Okay, I think we've more or less just in time exhausted our question and answer session. Again, from my side, thank you very much for your interactive responses. I can clearly see that you've been attentive. The links will be made available, and I will immediately, when I sign off now, I will send the PowerPoint presentations to the organizers, so you will have access to that as well. So those of you maybe missed last night's session and had questions around the scoping, systematic, integrative reviews, you'll find it in last night's slides. The slides are quite extensive. I think there's more than 80 of them. So there is quite a bit of detail. And then in tomorrow night's session, when we look at conceptual frameworks and developing those, I'll come back with some more applications that you can use. The one that I'm thinking of that's now just slipped my mind. All right, so from me, have an amazing evening, and I might see you tomorrow night again. Have a lovely evening. Take care and go well. Bye-bye.